She was called Wolfless and cast from the Rite. Then the Alpha King said, "Shift." I have ruled Keldrath for 37 years, without once feeling my wolf pull toward a woman. He has been quiet inside me, not dead, not sleeping, simply uninterested in the parade of arranged meetings my council has assembled across the decades. I stopped fighting him on the matter long ago. A king without a fated mate is still a king. I had a kingdom to hold, a glacial valley to keep from fracturing into war, a people who needed a steady hand more than they needed to watch me pine. I made my peace with the silence. Then I watched a young woman be declared nothing in the center of my own Rite hall, and my wolf came awake like a fire door thrown open in a gale. Her name was Senna. I did not know that yet. I knew only what I saw from the dais, a slender figure in a plain gray dress standing inside the Rite circle while the examiner pressed his palms to her temples and the hall held its breath. The Rite of Wolves is the oldest ceremony in Keldrath. Every wolf of bloodline age submits to it. The examiner reads the inner wolf, confirms the lineage, marks the candidate's seat in the pack registry. It is not supposed to take long. For Senna, it took a very long time. The examiner lifted his hands. He stepped back. He looked at her the way a man looks at an empty cup he expected to find full. "No wolf present," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "No inner bond, no dormant thread, no bloodline resonance. The candidate carries nothing." The hall did not erupt. That would have been kinder. Instead, there was a sound I have learned to dread in 37 years of ruling a pack. The sound of everyone breathing at once. A collective exhale that means we are all thinking the same thing, and none of us will say it aloud because we don't have to. Senna stood inside the circle. She did not flinch. She did not look at the floor. She looked straight ahead at a point somewhere beyond the examiner's shoulder, and her chin did not drop 1 degree, and I thought, watching her, whoever she is, she has received bad news before. She has learned not to give them the satisfaction of watching her break. "The candidate is dismissed from the Rite," the examiner said. "The bloodline seat is forfeit pending council review." She turned. She walked toward the doors at the back of the hall. The pack parted for her, not unkindly, just instinctively, the way a river moves around a stone, and the doors opened, and she walked through them, and she was gone. My wolf lunged. It was not a metaphor. It was not a feeling I could file under vague unease or inexplicable curiosity. It was a physical lurch inside my chest, like something had reached through my ribs and grabbed and was now straining toward the closed doors at the back of the hall with everything it had. I gripped the arm of the throne. I kept my face level. Around me, the ceremony resumed. The next candidate stepped into the circle, and I sat very still and tried to understand what had just happened to me. My wolf had not done that. In 37 years, my wolf had not done that. I let the Rite continue for another hour. I said nothing. I dismissed the council at the end with clean thanks, watched the hall empty, and when the last advisor had filed out and I was alone with the stone pillars and the dying candles, I stood up and walked to the back of the hall and put my hand flat against the door she had walked through. The pull was still there, fainter with distance, but there. I went to find her. The outer kennels of Keldrath sit at the base of the fortress wall, sheltered from the glacial wind by a row of spruce that the third king planted 200 years ago. They are not glamorous quarters. The pack's elder wolves winter there, wolves past their fighting years, wolves healing from injury, wolves who need quiet and warmth and someone with patience enough to sit with them through the long nights. It is not a posting that ambitious pack members seek. Senna had been tending them for 4 years. I found her in the third kennel, kneeling in the straw beside a gray wolf the size of a small pony, working oil into the animal's left shoulder joint with slow, deliberate strokes. The wolf's eyes were half closed. Its breathing was the slow, even breathing of an animal that has decided, entirely, to trust. She heard me at the kennel door. She looked up. She had dark eyes. I noticed that first, very dark, very steady, the kind of eyes that have stopped expecting the world to be fair and have made a kind of peace with that fact without becoming bitter. She was younger than I had thought in the hall. 22, perhaps. 23. She started to rise. Pack protocol with the Alpha King, you stand. Stay, I said, you'll disturb him. She looked at the wolf, then back at me, and settled back into the straw. The wolf's ear twitched, but his breathing did not change. You watched the Rite today, she said. It was not a question. I presided over it. Then you heard what the examiner said. I did. A pause. Her hands kept moving on the wolf's shoulder, oil and pressure, and the slow, patient rotation that an animal with a joint this stiff needs to be eased rather than forced. She was not performing the work for my benefit. She was doing it because it needed doing, and she was here to do it, and my presence had not changed that calculation. I am not Wolfless, she said very quietly. I want to say that once, not to argue with the council, not to appeal the finding, just once to someone because it is true. My wolf pressed against the inside of my sternum like a hand against a window. Tell me, I said. She looked at the wolf in her lap for a long moment. My mother told me before she died that our line carries a dormant wolf, not absent dormant, that it does not wake the way common bonds wake in ceremony or in adolescence, that it waits. She paused. She told me it waits for a call it recognizes. An alpha of sufficient, she used the word resonance. She said that word very carefully, like she'd thought about it for a long time. The glacial wind moved through the spruce outside. The elder wolf shifted fractionally in the straw, resettling, his trust in this woman so complete that my presence a few feet away had not unsettled him at all. What was her bloodline? I asked. Senna's hand stilled for one moment, then resumed. She never told me the name. She said it would cause trouble if people knew, and she had enough trouble. She said the name was old, older than the current registry. I stayed at the kennel door for a long time after that, long enough that she glanced at me twice, uncertain whether I was going to speak or simply leave. What is your name? I said at last. Your full name. Something moved across her face. Not hope. She had learned to be careful with hope. Something more cautious than hope. Something that had learned to check its own pulse before it started running. Senna Val Ashran, she said, though the council will probably remove the Val when they finish the registry review. The Val, the particle that denotes recognized pack bloodline, they would strip it from her on the strength of one examiner's reading. My wolf had gone very still inside me. Not quiet, the way he'd been quiet for 37 years. Still the way a wolf goes still when it has found what it has been looking for, and is afraid that moving will make it disappear. They will not touch your name, I said. I left before she could answer. I needed to think. I spent 3 days thinking. My counsel was not idle in those 3 days. Aldrich of Keldrath does not often take an interest in the fate of a dismissed Rite candidate, and the absence of indifference on my part was noted. By the second morning, 3 senior advisors had found occasion to visit me separately and explain, each in their own vocabulary, that the examiner's reading was authoritative, that the bloodline registry was clear, that pursuing an irregular finding would undermine the integrity of the Rite, and that this was the part they phrased most delicately, in the way of people who believe they are saying something for your own good. A king of my experience should not mistake a passing interest for a bond. I let each of them finish. I thanked each of them for their counsel. I did not tell any of them what my wolf had done the moment Senna walked out of the hall. What I did instead was go to the archive. The Keldrath archive lives in the lower levels of the fortress, a cold, stone-flagged warren of shelves that the pack archivist, a woman named Peritha who has forgotten more about bloodline genealogy than most scholars ever learn, has organized according to a system that only she fully understands. I told her what I was looking for, bloodlines older than the current registry, lines that might have gone quiet, lines with records of dormant wolves, not absent, dormant. Peritha looked at me for a long moment over the top of her spectacles. "The moon lines," she said. "Tell me." She led me to a section of the archive I had never entered, shelves pushed against the deepest wall, the records there bound in a darker leather, the ink faded to brown at the edges. She pulled a volume and set it on the reading table and stood back, and I spent 4 hours with the cold stone under my boots and the archive lamp throwing shadows across pages that had not been opened in a very long time. The Val Ashran line. It was there. It was old, older than the current registry by 2 full generations, predating the council's reorganization of pack bloodlines under my grandfather's reign. The Val Ashran line had been a moon line, a bloodline carrying what the archive called the Silver Inheritance, a wolf form that appeared in recorded instances once every several generations. A white wolf. Not a common white, the archive was careful about this, in the dry, precise language of scholars who have learned to write around things that people find difficult to believe. A silver-white, luminous form. A Luna wolf. A wolf that, in the records of 3 separate sightings across 400 years, had caused every other wolf in the vicinity to bow. The last recorded instance was 412 years ago. The Val Ashran line had been considered extinct for 200 years. The archive entry was marked, in a different hand from the rest, with a single word in the old script. Dormant. Not absent, dormant. I closed the volume. I sat for a while in the cold archive with the lamp burning and my wolf perfectly, electrically still inside my chest. Then I sent for the examiner. He came to my study the next morning. A careful man, the examiner, careful in his dress, careful in his language, careful in the way of people who have built a professional life on the authority of their judgments and have learned to be wary of anything that questions them. He was wary when I asked him to describe, precisely, what he had felt when he pressed his palms to Senna Val Ashran's temples. "No wolf present," he said. "No inner bond, no dormant thread, no bloodline resonance." "Those were your words in the hall," I said. "I am asking you to be more precise." A pause. He straightened slightly. The examination was standard. The results were. "What did you feel?" Another pause, longer this time. There was. He stopped, started again. There was a quality to the absence that was not typical. Most candidates with no inner wolf are simply quiet. What I encountered with the candidate was not quiet. It was more like, he hesitated, and I watched him choose his next word with the care of a man picking his way across uncertain ground. Contained, as though something were present but not accessible, not to me. I looked at him for a long time. "And you recorded it as no wolf present." "The Rite protocol does not have a category for." "No," I said, "it does not." I dismissed him. I went to the window and looked out at the glacial valley below, the ice-white surface of it, the distant mountains, the long cold light of a Keldrath afternoon slanting across the snow. Not accessible, not to me. My wolf's steady, electric stillness had not changed. I knew what I needed to do. I found her at the kennels again. The same gray wolf, different shoulder, she had moved to the right side, working with the same patient, oil-slicked deliberateness. A second wolf lay behind her, its head resting on the back of her ankle, asleep. She looked up when I appeared at the kennel door. "You've come back," she said. I went to the archive. Something shifted in her face, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes that might have been fear and might have been the effort not to hope. "The Val Ashran line," I said, 200 years of archive record. The entry is marked dormant, not extinct. She set down the oilcloth very carefully. The gray wolf opened one eye, assessed the situation, and closed it again. "My mother," she said, and stopped. "She told you the truth," I said, "about all of it." For a moment she did not move. Then she pressed her hand flat against the wolf's flank, a steadying gesture. But I thought it was not the wolf she was steadying, and breathed in slowly, and looked at me with those very dark, very steady eyes. "What does it mean?" she said. "For me, practically. The council has already filed the registry amendment." "The council," I said, "has not yet received my instruction on the matter." "You're the Alpha King. You could instruct them to restore the record." "Yes." "That is not the same as proving the examiner's reading wrong." I looked at her. She was not asking me to do something easy. She understood exactly what she was asking, not a correction of the paperwork but a demonstration, proof, the kind that cannot be argued with afterward. "No," I said, "it is not." The glacial wind moved through the spruce. Somewhere in the upper fortress, a bell marked the afternoon watch. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking," I said carefully, "that I would like to call the Rite assembly again. The full hall, the full council, the examiner." She was very still, and ask you to step back into the circle." A long silence. The sleeping wolf's ear moved once. Outside, the spruce branches shifted. "To shame me a second time," she said very quietly, not accusatory. Just naming it, the way she would name any fact she needed to hold steady. "No," I said, "to call what is there." Her eyes stayed on me. I could see her measuring it, the weight of walking back into that hall, the cost of it if nothing happened, the risk of trusting a king she had met 3 days ago over a sleeping wolf. "The archive said," she began slowly, "that the wolf waits for a call it recognizes, an alpha of sufficient resonance." She paused. "My mother's word." "Yes. And you believe?" "I believe," I said, "that your examiner told me when pressed that what he encountered was not absence. It was something he could not access." Something moved in her face. Something I would only later understand was the particular expression of a person who has held an unwitnessed truth for so long that being told it aloud by someone else, someone who looked in the archive, someone who pressed the examiner, someone who came back to the kennel a second time, is almost too much to take standing. "All right," she said, her voice was steady, "call the assembly." I called it for the following morning. The summons went out that evening, the full Rite council, the senior pack members, the examiner. My instruction said only that a review of the Rite finding for the candidate Senna Val Ashran had been called, and that attendance was required. My counsel descended on me within the hour, in pairs and singly, with concerns. I heard every concern. I thanked everyone for their counsel. I did not sleep much. My wolf spent the night moving inside my chest like a tide that has learned where the shore is. What I found interesting in those dark hours was not fear. It was something closer to certainty, the unnerving, groundless certainty of a man who has waited a very long time for something he did not know he was waiting for, and who now finds himself 12 hours away from it. My wolf had been quiet for 37 years. He had not stirred for the parade of arranged meetings, the diplomatic daughters, the well-suited matches my counsel had brought me across 3 decades of patient, increasingly resigned effort. He had lunged toward a woman in a plain gray dress, walking out of a hall. There are things you know in your bones before your mind has assembled the evidence. My mind was still working through the archive records and the examiner's careful words and the mathematics of dormant bloodlines. My wolf had already arrived. The Rite Hall of Venmore holds 200 people standing. It held close to that when Senna walked through the doors. She wore the same gray dress. I had, through a messenger, offered her access to the pack wardrobe. She had declined politely. She wore what she had, the plain gray dress, clean, and her dark hair pulled back simply, and the composed stillness of a woman who has decided to walk into the hardest room of her life with exactly the face she arrived in the world with. No ornamentation, no performance. The hall watched her walk to the center of the Rite circle. I was already at the dais. I had been watching the doors since they opened. I watched her cross the stone floor while the assembled pack stood in the kind of silence that is not quite hostile and not quite neutral. The silence of people who have been told that a settled question is being reopened, and who are not entirely certain how they feel about that. The examiner stood to my left. He had the look of a man who wishes he were somewhere else. Senna stopped inside the circle. She looked at me. I stepped down from the dais. This was not the protocol. The Alpha King does not descend from the dais during a Rite review. I watched my council register this, the small stirring, the exchanged glances, the careful collective restraint that keeps experienced advisors from reacting when their king does something unprecedented. I walked across the hall floor and stood at the edge of the Rite circle. She was 4 feet from me. My wolf was not moving now. He was completely, perfectly still in the way I had been learning to read over the past 3 days, not quietude but readiness. A bow drawn back. Senna Val Ashran, I said, loud enough for the hall to hear. The archive records your bloodline as dormant, not extinct. The senior archivist of Keldrath confirms it. The examiner has confirmed that what he encountered was not absence. A very slight sound from the hall. I did not look away from her. I am going to invoke the Alpha's call, I said. Under the old code, the ruling Alpha may call a wolf that has not responded to standard examination. It has not been invoked in this hall in recorded memory. I paused. You have the right to refuse it. She looked at me, those dark, steady eyes. I know, she said. Do you refuse it? No. I held her gaze for one more moment. Then I drew a breath and let it down into the place inside myself where my wolf lives, the deep place, the resonant place, the place where the Alpha's authority is not a title or a crown but something older than either of those things, and I spoke the word. Not a shout, not a command the way commands sound in a council chamber. The old word in the old voice, the one that the earliest of the Alpha Kings used when the pack was not yet a kingdom, and authority was a matter of resonance rather than registry. The word has no equivalent in modern speech. It means roughly, I see you. Come forward, show me what you carry. The hall was absolutely silent. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Senna Val Ashran shifted. I have seen wolves shift. I have seen the transformation hundreds of times in my life. The pack's members in the moonlit clearing, the young wolves in their first ceremony, the warriors preparing for patrol. I know what a shift looks like. I know its speed and its light and the particular quality of the air around a wolf as it moves from one form to the other. I have never seen anything like what happened in the Rite Hall of Venmore that morning. The light that came off her was silver, not the warm amber of a common wolf's transformation, not the cold blue-white of a particularly strong Alpha's shift, silver, the color of moonlight on glacier ice, the color of something that has been waiting underground for 400 years and has finally been given permission to surface. It came from her like a tide coming in, not violent, not explosive, just steady and enormous and utterly unstoppable. The wolf that stood in the circle when the light receded was the size of a young stallion. Silver white every inch of her. Not gray, not pale white, with a luminance in the fur that was not reflected light but something else, something the old archive had tried to describe in 3 separate entries and had eventually given up on and simply called the silver inheritance. Her eyes were pale gold. Her bearing was, I do not have the word. I am a king. I have stood in rooms with rulers and generals and creatures of extraordinary power for 37 years, and I do not have the word for what her bearing was. She stood in the Rite circle and looked at the assembled hall. The pack bowed. Not one or two, not a ripple of deference spreading from the edges, all of them. 200 people and every wolf in the hall simultaneously, as if a single command had been given that everyone heard and no one had to think about. The senior advisors, the council members, the warriors at the door, the examiner. The examiner went to his knees. I heard a sound in the hall that I had no immediate name for, a sound that was not quite breathing and not quite speaking, a collective exhalation that was, I realized slowly, The sound of 200 people trying to process something their bodies had understood before their minds caught up. I stayed standing. My wolf, that wolf who had been quiet for 37 years and who had lunged toward the door she walked through and who had been perfectly, electrically still for 3 days, went still in a different way now. Not the stillness of waiting, the stillness of arrival. I knew what had happened to me the moment she walked out of the hall. I took a step into the right circle, then another. She was looking at me, the pale gold eyes steady, not frightened, not performing, simply present the way she had been present in the kennel with her hand on the gray wolf's shoulder, present the way she was present in the hall when the examiner read her as empty and she lifted her chin and kept it lifted. I stopped in front of her. In the shifted form, her shoulder came level with my chest. She was not a small wolf in any meaningful sense of the word. She was the largest wolf I had ever been this close to, and the light off her fur made everything else in my field of vision slightly less vivid by comparison. "Seneval Ashran," I said. Her ear tilted. "You are the true Luna of Keldrath." The words came out of me like a formal declaration and like a private thing at the same time, which I had not expected. "Your bloodline is confirmed and restored. Your seat in the registry stands." I paused. "And you are my fated mate. I ask for your consent to name it here in this hall before all of them." The hall was so quiet I could hear the candle flames. She held the pale gold gaze on me for a long, still moment. Then she shifted back. It was as fast as the first shift had been slow. The silver light folded back into her like a tide receding, and she was standing in the plain gray dress in the right circle, and she was looking at me with those dark, steady eyes, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been holding their breath for 400 years and has just, finally, been allowed to exhale. "Yes," she said, "you have my consent." The sound that went through the hall then was not polite acknowledgement. It was the sound of 200 people releasing something they had been holding, relief and wonder, and the particular emotion that does not have a common name, the emotion you feel when something that was broken for a very long time is put right in front of your eyes. I held out my hand. She took it. The mate mark blazed gold on both our wrists simultaneously. A warmth that moved up my arm and through my chest and settled somewhere behind my sternum in the place where my wolf had been quiet for 37 years and was quiet no longer. The council spent 3 days in review. I did not wait for the review. There was paperwork, and Peritha handled the paperwork with her customary efficiency and the barely concealed satisfaction of a woman who has been maintaining a dormant archive entry for 2 decades on principle, and has now been proven correct. The Val Ashran bloodline entry was restored in full, the registry amendment voided, the Rite finding formally reversed. The examiner submitted a written account of his examination that was 3 times longer than any examination record in the past century, and that said, in essence, that he had encountered something outside the scope of his training and had lacked the language to name it. I considered this a generous and accurate description of events, and filed it accordingly. What I could not file, and did not try to, was the texture of the days that followed. She stayed at the outer kennels. I had offered her chambers in the upper fortress immediately, the Luna's quarters, which had been empty for the entirety of my reign. She had looked at the offer with those dark eyes and said, carefully, that she would like to consider the move carefully, that she had responsibilities at the kennels, that the elder wolves needed consistency of care, and that she did not want to install herself in quarters she might have to vacate if this somehow resolved differently than it appeared to be resolving. I told her it would not resolve differently. She told me that I was the Alpha King, and that she appreciated that, and that she had also been told things that turned out to be wrong before, and that she hoped I could understand why she wanted to take it 1 step at a time. I understood. I went to the kennels every morning. Not to press her toward anything. not to conduct affairs of state from a convenient location, or to demonstrate publicly that the Alpha King's interest was serious. I went because the outer kennels at dawn have the quality of the glacial light that I have loved about Keldrath since I was a child, the particular blue gold that comes off the ice in the hour before full sunrise, and because the elder wolves, who are aged past their politics and their ambitions and their territorial instincts, had adopted a posture toward Senna that I found I wanted to be near. They trusted her completely, without reservation, without the careful calibration that wolves usually maintain with even friendly humans. The gray wolf with the stiff shoulder joint tracked her movements in the kennel the way a compass tracks north. The ancient female with the scarred flank, who had bitten 3 separate attendants in the past year, would rest her massive gray head in Senna's lap and breathe slow. My wolf found this restful, in a way that I did not have the words to explain. I would sit on the kennel bench, the old wooden bench that someone had placed there years ago for exactly this purpose, and watch her work, and we would talk, not about bloodlines or council decisions or the formal implications of a Luna designation, about the wolves, about the glacial valley in spring, which she had never seen because she had arrived in winter, about the archive. I had told Peritha to give Senna full access, and she had been spending her evenings in the lower levels with the old records, and she had found 3 more Val Ashran entries that Peritha had not catalogued, and had arrived one morning bright-eyed in a way that I recognized as the excitement of a person who finds the past genuinely compelling. On the 4th morning she said, without preamble, as she was working the gray wolf's shoulder, "I would like to see the Luna's quarters." "Now," I said, "if it's convenient." "It is convenient." She went that afternoon. She came back to the kennels the following morning, and informed me that the quarters were well proportioned, and that the south window had a clear view of the glacial valley, and that she would be willing to move if the elder wolf's care could be formally assigned to an attendant she trusted. We found the attendant that same afternoon. She moved the following morning. The formal naming ceremony was held at the end of the review period, as protocol requires. I had seen 3 such ceremonies in my reign, 2 for Lunas of pack families, 1 for a senior warrior. They are dignified and quiet, and the pack stands witness, and it is over in 20 minutes. This one took considerably longer, for reasons I had not entirely anticipated. The Rite Hall of Venmore filled to capacity by midday, which the ceremony was not scheduled to begin until a full 2 hours early. By the time I arrived from the upper fortress, there were pack members standing in the corridor outside, listening through the open doors, which had not happened at any ceremony in living memory. Peritha, who has attended more pack ceremonies than anyone alive, told me afterward that she had not seen the hall that full since my own investiture. Senna stood at the circle again. Not in the plain gray dress. In the Luna's white, the formal ceremonial dress, simple and severe, the kind of garment that is designed to make the person wearing it the entire point of the room, and which achieves this through restraint rather than ornamentation. She wore it the way she wore everything, as though it were simply the thing she had put on that morning, and she had other things to attend to after. I descended from the dais again. My council had, by this point, become accustomed to this. The naming words are old, older than the registry, older than the formal rite, words that go back to the period the archive called the First Kingdom, when the Alpha Kings and their Lunas ruled not from a fortress but from the forest itself. I spoke them in the old language, the one that only the Alpha King learns in full, and felt Senna's hand tighten on mine as the words moved through the hall, because the old language has a quality that the modern tongue does not. It does not just carry meaning, it carries resonance, the way the archive's descriptions of the Silver Inheritance tried and failed to capture the quality of what they were describing. When I finished, the mate mark on both our wrists blazed again, briefly, brilliantly, the same gold warmth that I would learn over the years, meant something was being confirmed rather than established, the mark restating a fact that had been true since the moment she walked out of the hall and my wolf lunged toward the door. The hall bowed. All of them. The same as before, in the moment her wolf emerged, but this time not the wordless compulsion of 200 people reacting to a silver luna. This time a willing thing, a choice. 200 people who had watched the evidence accumulate over the past week, who had heard the archivist's confirmation and the examiner's revised account, and who had, most of them, been in the hall the morning the silver wolf stood in the right circle and lit the room, choosing, this time, to give what they had involuntarily given before. I found I was moved by that. Involuntary reverence is a powerful thing. Chosen reverence is something else. There are things that happen in the months after a naming that no ceremony prepares you for. The paperwork is the least of it. Peritha managed the registry restoration and the formal Luna designation, and the council amendments with the efficiency of a woman who has been waiting for something to do that is actually interesting, and the legal and genealogical implications of a Val Ashran reinstatement, which turned out to be considerable, involving 2 disputed land grants and 1 old treaty that had been considered null on the grounds that a Val Ashran signatory was required, kept her occupied, and I thought, genuinely happy for the better part of 3 months. What the ceremony does not prepare you for is the private side of a bond that you have been carrying for decades without knowing it. My wolf had been quiet for 37 years. I had made my peace with that silence. I had told myself, with the pragmatic resignation of a middle-aged king who has ruled a glacial valley through 2 wars and a famine and a succession crisis, that a man without a fated mate is still a man, and that destiny is not obligated to arrive on a timetable you find convenient. What I had not understood was how much weight the silence had been. I noticed it by its absence, the constant low pressure of a wolf who is restless and does not know why, a pressure I had carried so long I had ceased to notice it was pressure at all, was gone. My wolf was not quiet in the old way, the way of enforced stillness. He was quiet the way a man is quiet who has come home after a very long journey and sat down, and looked around at the familiar walls and understood, for the first time in years, that he is not required to be anywhere else. Senna noticed things without being told. This was not a skill she had cultivated. It appeared to be simply the way her attention worked. She observed the world with the thoroughness of someone who has spent a long time in conditions where close attention was the thing that kept you steady, and she had not yet unlearned it. She noticed that I slept better. She did not say so directly. She mentioned, one morning over the first meal of the day, that I seemed less like someone who had been awake at the 4th bell, and I said, somewhat startled, that I had in fact not been awake at the 4th bell for the first time in several years, and she nodded with the air of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. She noticed that my wolf was calmer in council. This she did say directly. I had told her about the council meetings, about the particular friction of sitting in a chamber full of competing agendas when you carry an animal inside you who finds political maneuvering fundamentally uninteresting. And she had listened carefully, and then said that perhaps the wolf's agitation had not been about the council's content so much as the general condition of not being settled, and that now that he was settled, the council would probably bother me less. She was right. I did not tell her at the time that finding this out irritated me slightly, because it suggested that 37 years of council meetings had been harder than they needed to be. She noticed also that I came to the kennels even after the elder wolf's care had been formally transferred to the attendant she had chosen. I came because I had gotten into the habit of sitting on the old wooden bench in the glacial morning light, and because the elder wolves still tracked Senna's movements and treated her presence as the most important fact in the kennel, and because I had discovered that the hour before the morning council was better with her in it. One morning she said, not looking up from the gray wolf's shoulder, "You know the attendant has this well in hand." "I do." You don't have to keep coming. No. A pause. Are you going to stop? She asked. No, I said. She smiled, still not looking up. It was a small smile, private, the smile of someone who has received the answer they expected and finds they are glad of it. I filed it away with the other things I had been filing, her hand steady on the gray wolf's shoulder, her expression in the archive when she found the uncatalogued entries, the way she had looked at me in the moment before she said yes in the right circle, with the silver wolf's light still fading from the air around her. A king accumulates things. 37 years of ruling a glacial valley produces an archive of its own, decisions made and battles fought and treaties signed and people lost, the long accumulating record of a reign. I had thought I understood what it meant to carry a full life. I had not understood that a full life and a settled life are not the same thing. The glacial valley in spring is a different world. She had said in those first kennel mornings that she had never seen it. She had arrived in winter, when the valley is ice-white, and the light is the long, slanted blue gold that I love, but that does not prepare you for what happens when the melt comes. In spring the ice retreats and the valley floor fills with snowmelt rivers, and the grass that comes up is the particular vivid green of things that have been compressed under snow for 6 months and are glad to no longer be. And the elder wolves, who have been confined to the kennels for the cold months, are allowed into the outer pastures. I took her to the eastern ridge on the first clear morning of the melt. It is a walk of 2 hours up the old track, steep in places, with long views of the valley as you climb. She did not need me to show her the way. She had the whole fortress mapped by then, including the maintenance routes and the supply paths and the section of the east wall that the third king had repaired with slightly different stone, and that she had noticed because she pays attention to things. But she did not have the eastern ridge, because you do not find the eastern ridge by accident. It requires knowing that the track ends, apparently, at a false summit, and then continuing past the point where most people stop. We continued past the point where most people stop. The view from the true summit takes in the whole glacial valley, the ice fields to the north, the green valley floor to the south, the rivers catching morning light, the distant fortress of Keldrath standing against the mountain line the way it has stood for 500 years, stone and purpose and long patience. The valley stretched below us in the first full warmth of the season, and it was exactly what it always is in that first clear morning of spring, the thing you have to see to understand what you were holding during the winter. Senna stood at the summit and looked. She did not say anything for a long time. This was characteristic of her. She does not fill silence with language when the silence is doing something more useful, and the silence at the eastern ridge in early spring is doing quite a lot. After a while she said, "It's the size of it." Yes. I knew it was there. You can see the shape of it from the fortress, but knowing a thing is there and seeing it are different things. Yes. We stood for a while longer. The morning light moved across the valley floor. The snowmelt rivers caught it in pieces, scattered it, sent it glancing off in directions that made the whole valley floor briefly brilliant. My mother told me, she said, that the Val Ashran line came from the north. She paused. I thought she meant origin. I think now she might have meant home. That this is where the blood is from. The mate mark on my wrist was warm in the spring light. Yes, I said. The archive confirms it. The earliest Val Ashran records are northern. Your bloodline has been part of this valley for as long as there has been a Keldrath to be part of. She looked at the valley for another long moment. That changes how it feels, she said, to stand here. I know, I said, it does. She turned to look at me then, and there was something in her face that I had not seen before, not the steady composure of the kennel, not the controlled restraint of the naming ceremony, not even the private smile of the morning over the elder wolves. Something more open than any of those. The face of a person who has stopped calculating the cost of showing you who they are. Thank you, she said, for coming back to the kennel the second time. I thought about the night I had stood at the archive table with the Val Ashran volume, and the cold stone under my boots, and the lamp making shadows on 400-year-old script. I thought about the examiner's careful words. I thought about 3 days of certainty that my mind could not yet justify, and my wolf did not require justification for. Thank you, I said, for stepping back into the circle. She held my gaze for a moment, then she turned back to the valley. The gray wolf will be in the east pasture now, she said. He's been waiting for the melt. He has. I want to see him out there. In the grass instead of the straw. We'll go down after the morning watch. She nodded. She settled into the view with the ease of someone who has established, to her own satisfaction, that this is a place she belongs, and that the person beside her is not going to take that establishment away from her. My wolf was as quiet as he has ever been in 37 years of my life. Quieter, in fact, not the enforced quiet of a wolf who has nothing to pull toward, the deep, earned quiet of a wolf who has been looking for the right direction for a very long time and has, at last, found it. Below us, the glacial valley ran green to the mountains, the rivers catching morning light and scattering it across everything, and the old fortress stood against the sky exactly as it had always stood, patient and stone, holding the history of a bloodline that had been waiting here all along. She was beside me on the eastern ridge. Her hand was in mine, the mate mark warm against the spring air. That was enough. That was exactly what enough felt like, not a grand thing, not a ceremony or a declaration or a hall full of bowing wolves, but a morning on a ridge and a valley spread below, and the certainty, settled into the bones, that the woman beside you is exactly the one your life was waiting for. 37 years is a long time to wait. She was worth every one of them.